Hi, my name is Carlotta. I am 30 years old and I have just bought a house, not just any house, but a magnificent, light-filled three-room dwelling with a spacious open terrace, wrought iron railings on which proud local cats have already started to settle in the first days, and a stunning garden that stretches right up to the fence and is filled with the scents of roses, lavender, and jasmine, as if this is not a suburb of Ravenna, but some lost corner of Tuscany. The realtor, a charming elderly man in an impeccably ironed shirt, continued to enthusiastically tell me about the wonderful landscape design, pointedly praising the neat flower beds and rare varieties of hydrangeas, brought, as he assured, from France itself. But I, almost not listening to him, saw only one thing in front of me: my ideal morning place for coffee, where I, wrapped in a blanket, will greet the dawn with a cup of strong espresso, and those peaceful weekends when I, in rubber gloves, with pruning shears in my hands and hair gathered in a careless bun, will trim the faded shoots, talking to the plants as if they were my own. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. Standing in the empty, echoing living room with its cold marble floors and the soft shadows of dusty windows, with the keys in my hand, I suddenly felt a wave rising inside me. Not panic, not fear, but something completely different, something sincere and almost childish. Perhaps it was joy, pure and undiluted, such that I almost cried, because it was mine, truly mine, and no one else had anything to do with it. After many years of wandering around other people's apartments with peeling walls and perpetually broken faucets, after endless conversations with landlords who either did not answer the phone or came in the evening looking tired and promising to fix everything next week, after nights when through paper-thin walls I could hear the cries of quarrels or love moans, or the barking of the neighbor's dog, I finally had something untouchable: the mortgage papers, still warm from the photocopier and with my signature on every other page, sat in my wallet like jewelry. And I wanted to call someone, my mum, an old friend, a former colleague, anyone, just to share this special moment with someone, but I didn't. Instead, I had this crazy, almost childish idea: what if I didn't tell anyone? Not a word, not a hint, not a photo in a messenger, just a surprise. It was my birthday in a few weeks. I could kill two birds with one stone: throw a birthday party and a housewarming party. I could already imagine the faces of my parents, David and Gemma, when they walked into the house and realized that their youngest daughter, the one they thought had never known what she wanted all her life and had wasted her youth in rented apartments, now owned real property. My older sister, Beatrice, would probably have had a mild heart attack. She was always the golden child, successful, smart, driven, with everything in place: a prestigious job in marketing, a harmonious relationship, perfect hair, and an Instagram account filled with inspiring quotes and snapshots from her trips abroad. And me, I was always in the making, potentially talented, but always lagging behind, as if my life were a trial run for something that might one day become real. What they didn't know was that for the past 3 years, I'd been working 15-hour days, slaving away at a startup that started out in a rented office and warm pizza at night and ended up being acquired by a major international company. My name was on the list of those who received stock options, and 6 months ago, that abstract word suddenly turned into real money. For the first time in my life, I could afford to put a down payment on a house. I could afford not to tell anyone. I could afford to remain silent. The plan was simple, elegant, and, I thought, brilliant in its hidden drama. I wrote a short message, almost banal: "Hi everyone. I'm throwing a birthday party next Saturday at 7 p.m. I'd love to see you," and attached the address. No explanation, no bragging. Let them think I'd just moved in, or that it was a friend's apartment, or a cafe I'd rented for the evening. It was nice to know that the truth would only be revealed when they walked in and realized that this was my house, not someone else's, not rented, mine. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. I chose furniture, measuring centimeters so that the sofa would fit perfectly in front of the window, ordered framed paintings, looking through hundreds of options, and even spent an hour arguing with a salesperson at a flower shop about which plants would do best in my soil. Everything had to be perfect. I felt like this was my own personal performance, and this time I was not in the background. I was the main character. I made a guest list: my parents, Beatrice, and my closest friends Sarah, Federico, and Aurora. Sarah and I have been friends since college, when we wrote term papers together until dawn and dreamed of a future life full of inspiration and freedom. Federico is a guy I met at my first job, and since then we have been like brother and sister, often teasing each other, but always coming to each other's aid in difficult times, without asking for anything extra. And Aurora is my neighbor from the old apartment, with whom we first simply exchanged greetings in the elevator, then drank wine together on the balcony and shared stories, until one day we realized that we had become friends, real and warm, as happens rarely. The text was sent on Tuesday evening, and there was not a drop of ceremony in it, just a modest invitation, but in these simple words all my excitement, all my hope was hidden. Hi everyone. Next Saturday at 7 p.m. I am throwing a birthday party. I can't wait to see you all there. This year everything will be special. I attached the address without explanation, without going into details, without advertising, without asking for surprise. I just left the field for guesswork, believing that they would most likely think that I had moved to a new rented apartment or finally found a better place to live. Then I waited and waited. My friends usually respond within a few hours, happily responding to any excuse to get together, but my family, they are always slow to respond, as if their feelings and involvement require additional acclimatization. Sarah responded within minutes, and her reaction warmed me to the core. Oh my God, yes. New address? Have you moved? Can't wait, she wrote enthusiastically, her message conveying genuine joy for me, as if this were her special day too. Federico, as laconic as ever, sent a thumbs-up emoji and added, I don't want to miss this, Carlotta. And I knew he would come with a bottle of something strong and fresh jokes. Aurora did not stand on ceremony. She called me immediately, her voice ringing with excitement. What do you mean special? You can't just throw things like that around. Say everything, now. I smiled as I listened to her, feeling the tension ease, as if she had picked up my mood with her impatience and carried it forward to Saturday night, where something more than just a party awaited us. But from my family, complete silence, not a word, not a hint that they had read the message. The days passed, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and on each of them I checked my phone every now and then, telling myself not to pay attention, but inside everything was clenching with the familiar feeling of abandonment. And only on Friday evening, when I was almost giving in, the phone vibrated and a message from my mother, Carlotta, appeared on the screen. We can't come to your birthday. Beatrice got a promotion at work, and we're throwing her a birthday party that same evening. Sorry, dear, maybe next year. I stared at the message for 5 minutes, as if hoping that the letters would spell out something else, that it would change, that a postscript would appear. Just kidding, of course will come. But no, that was it. Maybe next year, for my birthday. I typed and immediately deleted about 10 different responses. In one I was trying to be ironic, in another, cold, in another, tragically bitter, then, sarcastic. Finally, my fingers wrote, Mom, Beatrice's party could be any day. This is my birthday we're talking about. The answer came 20 minutes later. Her promotion is a big deal, Carlotta. This party is important for her career. Do you understand? I read and reread those words, which contained nothing new except the same old, familiar truth. My successes had always been inferior to hers. Even if I jump above my head, fly into space and return with a new planet, Beatrice will still be more important. And here I am again, standing in my new living room, filled with the light scent of fresh flowers already hung, balloons smelling faintly of latex, and carefully chosen decor that I approved myself, imagining how it would look in photographs. I remember the menu, put together with love and knowledge of the guests' tastes, and the cake that I ordered with a special design, the golden letters 30 and a sprig of lavender, just like the one in my garden. It all suddenly seemed so naive to me. Like I was a girl who had thrown a doll party and the guests didn't come. I'm 30 years old and I still hope that my family will come for me. The worst thing is that Beatrice didn't even write me a single message, not a congratulations, not an apology. Not even a polite I'll miss you or I heard you're throwing a party. Complete radio silence, as if I had ceased to exist. I sat down on my new sofa, the first real sofa I'd bought for myself, choosing the texture of the fabric and the depth of the seat, sitting in the showroom for 3 hours to make sure it would fit, and thought about all the birthdays they'd forgotten or missed. Last year, they remembered after a week, the year before, after 3, and before that, after a month, with a card and the banal excuse, we've been so busy, sorry, darling, and when they remembered in time, it was always a quick text or a dry call, "Happy birthday, darling," without gifts, without effort, without genuine interest, whereas Beatrice's birthdays were carefully organized events with gourmet food, carefully selected gifts, and a photo booth like a wedding exhibition. You know what? Screw them. I grabbed the phone and called Sarah. "Hey, I've changed my plans for Saturday," I said as soon as she picked up the phone, and her voice immediately became tense. "Everything okay?" she asked, hearing something in my tone. "More than okay, trust me. Wait and see where we party, because if my family couldn't make time for my birthday, then they sure as hell don't deserve to know about my house." I looked out the window, where the sunset was already starting to shimmer, filling the garden with a warm amber light, and felt that this evening, and my whole life, would now belong only to those who were really there. Saturday came, and I threw the best party of my life, the kind that every woman should probably throw herself at least once, when everything that happens around her belongs only to her, her choice, her work, her small but real victory. Sarah, Federico, and Aurora arrived almost simultaneously, their cars pulling up to the house one after the other, and I watched from the kitchen as they came out onto my terrace, looked around, puzzled, and then froze in unison, their gaze moving from the facade to the garden, from the garden to the windows and back to me. Their reactions were priceless. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, Federico cursed with admiration, and Aurora's eyes filled with tears, and she rushed to hug me, whispering in my ear, "You did it. Carlotta, you really did it." We spent the evening on the terrace, where a gentle breeze fluttered the hanging lanterns, eating takeout from our favorite trattoria on the corner, washing it down with inexpensive but tart wine that I chose not for the price but for the memories, the same kind of wine Sarah and I drank in the dorm, when we dreamed about what we would be like in 10 years. They kept asking how I could afford the house when I bought it, and if it was all true, without a catch. I told them everything, about the startup, and about the sleepless nights when I wrote code and presentations, and about the moment when the news about the purchase of the company caught me in the supermarket, and I, standing with a basket in front of the shelf with pasta, suddenly realized that now my life is divided into before and after. It was important for them to know, and it was important for me to tell, because in front of them I did not have to pretend, did not have to justify or pretend they were genuinely happy for me, without envy, without teasing, without the need to equate everything with the successes of others. The party went perfectly, even better than I imagined. Everything I wanted came true, only without the family drama, without the stress, without the constant feeling that I have to prove something to someone. When everyone had left, leaving behind full plates, gift wrappings, crumpled napkins, and the air filled with laughter and music, I was left alone, surrounded by empty wine bottles and cards lying on the table. My phone had been silent all day, no calls from my parents, no texts from Beatrice, not even a simple "happy birthday," nothing, silence, like a blank wall. Months passed, life moved on as it should, day followed night, the garden needed tending, and the walls of the house that had once been mine were now filled with the voices of friends, the aromas of cooking, and the music playing on my old record player. My friends knew about the house, but I deliberately didn't tell my relatives about it, not a single mention. I specifically asked Sarah, Federico, and Aurora not to write about the house on social media, not to share photos, not to mark the location, and they understood me perfectly. I didn't want my parents to know about it, not because I wanted to keep it a secret, but because they weren't supposed to be part of my joys anymore. The silence of my family continued, thick and viscous, like fog over a river. From time to time, my mother sent short, distant messages. "Are you eating enough vegetables? Or is the weather too cold where you are?" But there was no interest in them, no desire to know how I was really doing, just ritual touches, as if out of politeness, not out of love. Beatrice did not write once, not a hint, not a casual message, not even an emoji sent by mistake. Absolute radio silence, as if she had deliberately deleted me from her list of live contacts. I devoted myself entirely to the house. I painted the walls in colors that I chose based on my feelings, installed new plumbing, furnishing the bathroom like a personal spa, and spent every Saturday in the garden, where I dug in bulbs, fertilized the soil and talked to each bush as if it were a living being. The neighbors were surprisingly friendly. My street was almost rural. We greeted each other, shared pies, had barbecues, and sometimes whole groups would gather in the yard, laughing and happy, as if we were living not in the 21st century, But in some cozy film adaptation of a novel, life was good, and then, in early March, my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I froze, as if I'd been dipped in cold water. The voice was cheerful, almost strained. "Carlotta, how are you? Honey, your father and I are having a family dinner next weekend. Everyone will be there, Uncle Jim, Aunt Carol, your cousins. We haven't seen you in so long." Something in her tone made me wary. My mother never threw informal dinners just like that. She always had an agenda, a hidden meaning, some why. "When is it?" I asked, trying not to show my tension. "Next Saturday, at 6 o'clock. Can you come?" "I'll be there," I answered, and this time, for good. Saturday came, and not wanting to go empty-handed, I baked my signature apple pie, the same one that my grandmother had once praised so much. I knocked on the door of my parents' house, hearing laughter and voices from inside, and felt my heart beat faster. My mother opened the door. Her face was bright, her smile, almost sincere. "Carlotta, you came after all," she said, and for a moment I thought that maybe everything would be different, but a second later I saw chairs arranged in the living room, a long table for 12 people, and faces I had not seen for years. Aunt Carol, Uncle Jim, cousins Mark and Lisa. Everyone rushed to hug, ask questions, comment. "Are you dating anyone? When's the wedding? What about work? Are you still there, at your startup?" The questions poured out one after another, like from a cornucopia, and I, smiling, gave vague answers, internally detached and tired of these conversations that had no interest, only evaluation, only comparison. This is why I avoided family gatherings, because they turned into an exam in which I, by default, failed. It was then that I noticed Beatrice at the other end of the room, shining, dazzling, with that expression on her face that always meant that everything was going perfectly for her. Next to her stood a tall guy in an expensive suit, hugging her by the waist, and she, laughing, showed off her left hand, sparkling with a ring, to a group of delighted women. "Let me have the pie," my mother said, and carried it into the kitchen before I could say anything. My father led me into the dining room. I saw my place, the last chair, squeezed into the corner, as far away from my parents and Beatrice as possible, the last place chosen. But, frankly, I felt almost relieved. From here, from this discreet corner seat, with the back of the chair against the wall and a serving tray on the right side, I could sit quietly, not participating in the main part of the conversation, avoiding most of the family interrogations and inevitable comparisons that were not only the norm in this family but, it seemed, an obligatory part of any gathering. "Dinner is served," my mother announced with a solemn intonation, as if she were presenting an exquisite gastronomic show, although in fact everything was as usual. Fried chicken with a crispy skin, mashed potatoes with the addition of butter, and vegetables, slightly overcooked, but still aromatic and familiar, like the smell of an old house where nothing changes, because everything has been established once and for all. I settled myself comfortably in my corner seat and began to eat slowly, without fussing, concentrating on the food, as if trying to drown out with its taste the emotional detachment I had felt since the moment I crossed the threshold of this house. Everyone was chatting, laughing, exchanging familiar phrases, passing dishes to each other, discussing the latest news. One of the cousins was talking about his work, someone was sharing plans for a summer holiday in Croatia, someone was complaining about traffic jams, and someone was simply laughing at his own jokes, too loudly, as if he was afraid that otherwise no one would hear him. I listened silently, without interfering, fencing myself off with an invisible wall that I had long ago learned to build so as not to let other people's words hurt. Then Mom stood up, as she always did when she had something important to announce, and tapped her wine glass with her knife, making a clear, ringing sound that immediately drew everyone's eyes to her. "Hello, everyone," she said, beaming as if she were holding a microphone on a stage rather than a glass. "We have some wonderful news to share with you." This evening, there was a sudden, complete silence at the table, as if everyone sensed that something special was about to happen. She was trembling with excitement, as if she herself was experiencing the joy she was about to announce. "Our Beatrice has bought herself a beautiful little house," she said proudly, her eyes shining like those of a child who has just received the gift of her dreams. "We are so proud of her." The applause began immediately, loud and friendly, as if everyone had known in advance that this occasion awaited them. I clapped too, automatically, trying not to show my surprise. Beatrice had bought a house. When? How could I not know? Why had no one told me? Why hadn't she thought it necessary to mention it, even in passing? But that was not all, my mother continued, her voice higher, more strained, as if it was about to break into a shriek from an excess of emotion. Beatrice also plans to announce her engagement soon, she added, and again the applause rang out around the table, this time with exclamations, with slaps on the backs, with joyful cries. Beatrice blushed, theatrically, as she knew how, without losing her perfect posture, and raised her left hand, demonstrating a diamond ring in which the light from the chandelier reflected, shimmering with all the shades of success. Her boyfriend, tall and handsome, with a confident smile and arms that draped easily around her waist, accepted the congratulations with a modest nod and a smile, as if he had something to contribute. My father stood up, raised his glass of wine, and made a toast. We have so much to celebrate tonight, so much to be happy about, and it's all because of our eldest daughter. He emphasized each word, emphasizing our eldest daughter, as if he had no other daughters. My stomach sank, not out of resentment, but out of that old, familiar ache when you know you're not considered a full-fledged part of the family, but they do it so gracefully that it's an act of love. There was an awkward pause at the table, even the relatives, busy with their plates, stopped eating, as if they sensed that something had happened that was uneven, that the air had grown thicker and heavier. All eyes turned to me now, they seemed to be waiting for me to react, to lower my eyes, to smile shyly, to withdraw into myself, as I had before. My mother turned to me with that smile I knew all too well, not kind, not loving, but mockingly condescending, as if she were playing a role in front of an audience. Beatrice has bought herself the perfect house, Carlotta, she said, as if by chance, but with a clear intonation of superiority. When do you think you will be able to achieve something like that? Or do you plan to wander from one rented apartment to another forever? The table grew even quieter, so much so that you could hear someone in the far corner saluting with a fork on a plate. I felt their eyes burning into me like scopes. They were waiting for me to blush, to hang my head, to cry, like I had when I was a child, when my mother would scold me for getting a B and Beatrice would get another A. I was used to being compared to Beatrice. I had been doing it my whole life, as if I had lived in her shadow, like a supporting role in a movie about her successes. But at least my parents had tried not to bring it up in front of others. This was new, it was deliberately cruel. Intended to humiliate me in front of the whole family, to make me look like a failure, directionless, like I was standing still while Beatrice was soaring. But I wasn't ashamed, I didn't blush, and I certainly wasn't going to cry. Instead, I very calmly put my fork down on the edge of my plate, took a sip of water, sat up straight as if my entire internal posture had gathered into one point, and looked my mother straight in the eye. Actually, Mom, I said, enunciating each word carefully, I've already done it, I bought myself a house. After these words, there was a deathly silence. No one moved, even Aunt Carol froze with her spoon in her hand. Everyone stared at me as if I'd just announced that I'd moved to Antarctica or won the lottery. The mocking smile on my mother's face disappeared as if it had been erased, and the glass of wine in my father's hand froze halfway to his mouth. Even Beatrice's fiancé looked awkward. He looked away, as if he suddenly felt out of place. What? Mom finally managed to say. I told you Beatrice bought herself a house. I heard, I replied calmly. I'm just saying, I did, too, a few months ago. The reaction was almost comical. Everyone gasped, like a chorus inhaling at once. My mother's face went through a series of emotions, changing one after another with alarming speed. First shock, then confusion, then almost childish resentment, followed by rage, but all ending in this strange, incredulous expression, as if she had decided I was lying. You bought a house, she repeated slowly. Really? And then, almost defiantly, then why didn't you tell us about it? I smiled at her with that same sweet, slightly ironic smile she had given me only a few moments ago, so strained, so theatrical, like an actress who hasn't finished her final scene but is already reaping the applause. Well, Mom, you could have seen all this if you had come to my birthday party, I said, not raising my voice, but making each word count, as if I were giving it a special edge. After all, I celebrated my last birthday in a new house. It was as if someone had opened a window into a storm at that moment. There were restrained, nervous sighs at the table. Someone noisily sucked in air. Aunt Carol's fork slipped from her fingers, falling with a sharp clink onto the china. Uncle Jim froze with his jaw hanging open, as if he had suddenly seen a ghost. All faces turned to Mom. Your birthday? Aunt Carol asked incredulously, her gaze moving from me to my mother, and there was something unexpected in her voice, reproach, disappointment, perhaps even a hint of indignation. Gemma, why didn't you go to Carlotta's birthday party? Mom, taken aback, clearly hadn't expected any of her relatives to question her decision, much less publicly question the wisdom of her actions. Her face flushed, her lips trembled slightly, and she opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water trying to breathe but unable to find an answer in her lungs. We had a scheduling conflict, she finally muttered, trying to sound confident, but her voice betrayed her. A scheduling conflict? I repeated, looking at her with the same calm concentration with which a surgeon looks at a patient before an operation. Is that what we call it now? Because I remember your exact words, Mom. You said that Beatrice's promotion party was more important than my birthday. A ringing silence hung over the table, the kind in which even the sound of breathing seemed loud. One by one, the relatives began to look at my mother, their faces tense, puzzled, even condemning. You could see the gears turning in their heads, how they were comparing the facts, asking themselves a simple but disturbing question: what kind of parents would really decide to ignore one daughter's birthday for the sake of a corporate party in honor of another? That's not true, my mother said desperately, folding her hands in front of her as if begging me not to pursue the subject. You're exaggerating, me? I said, and though I spoke quietly, my words struck me like a blow, because you didn't just miss my birthday this year, you missed last year's, and the one before that. In fact, you haven't been to one of my birthdays in 6 years. You usually remember it a week or a month later, if you remember it at all. The silence grew thicker, denser, almost tangible. The relatives sat with their eyes fixed on the scene, as if they were watching a tense scene in a theater where actors said out loud what was usually hidden behind a screen of politeness. Uncle Jim cleared his throat, his voice hoarse but firm. 6 years, you haven't been to Carlotta's birthday party in 6 years. Aunt Carol, who had been silent until then, now looked at my mother with an expression I had never seen in her eyes before, a mixture of shock, disappointment, and something like understanding, as if a truth she had ignored for so long had suddenly dawned on her. Gemma, she said slowly, as if weighing each word, you always said that you had the perfect family, that you loved both of your daughters equally. You said that Carlotta just didn't want to come to family events because she had nothing to brag about, that she was ashamed, that she hadn't accomplished anything in life. Oh, that was interesting. So my mother had not only kept silent about me, she had actively distorted my reality, turning me into a laughingstock, a failure, someone who couldn't get off her knees. I never said that, my mother protested, but her voice was shaking like fine china about to crack. You said it, Aunt Carol said firmly, her certainty cutting through the air like lightning. You said Carlotta was a failure, that she couldn't make her life work. But if she was such a failure, then explain one thing to me: how did she buy the house? And why weren't you at her birthday party? Uncle Jim nodded his agreement. Gemma, he repeated, that doesn't sound like equal treatment to me. It's like favoritism. Favoritism. The word hung in the air, heavy, ponderous, like a dusty curtain that someone had finally pulled back. Favoritism? Father muttered, his face puckering up as if he'd tasted something sour. That's ridiculous. We treat both of our daughters equally. I almost laughed, but instead I shook my head. Really, Dad? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. When was the last time you forgot Beatrice's birthday? When was the last time you missed her party because someone else had a party? He opened his mouth to answer, but then closed it, because we all knew the answer. Never. They never forgot Beatrice's birthday, they never missed her parties, they never used the excuse of scheduling conflicts. They went to see her, congratulated her, threw dinners, gave her gifts, acted like she was the center of their universe. Mom was clearly losing control, and her voice became shrill, almost hysterical. This is getting out of hand, she said, looking around at her relatives as if seeking their support. Carlotta, you're making us look bad in front of everyone. I'm not making you look bad, Mom, I'm just telling the truth about how you treated me for years, how you hid behind polite smiles and ostentatious concern the hurtful indifference I had felt since childhood, and how you stubbornly ignored my victories because they did not match your expectations. Beatrice, who had been sitting in a daze all this time, not daring to say a word, As if she had been temporarily cut out of the conversation, suddenly leaned forward and spoke, her voice thin, strained, as if she were trying to speak with dignity, but confidence was slipping through her fingers. "Carlotta, you are ruining everything," she said with a plaintive reproach that was supposed to evoke sympathy, but instead only caused me to feel cold irritation. This was supposed to be a celebration of what? I asked, no longer hiding the irony sounding in my words. "Your house? Your engagement? Because, be honest, Beatrice, it's always about you, isn't it? Every conversation, every event, every meeting, it all revolves around you. It's always you, you, that's not fair." She tried to object, but her voice became quieter, as if she didn't believe herself. I leaned forward, looking into her eyes, as if calling for sincerity, for the one that had long been lost between us. "Isn't that so? Then tell me, Beatrice, when was the last time you called me? Not on business, not because Mama asked, but just to see how I was? When was the last time you sent me a message that wasn't about you, not about your successes, problems, desires, but about me?" She was silent, her eyes darted around the room, trying to find support, words, an excuse, and justification, but they found nothing. The silence stretched out, hanging between us, taut as a wire about to start to run. "You know, I could just take all your late birthday wishes for me, those dry, happy days from the family chat, and post them publicly, in the same chat where most of you are sitting right now. Then everyone would see how this loving family really treats me." "Carlotta, stop," Mom hissed through clenched teeth, her voice not filled with fear for me, not with a desire to keep the peace, but with anger, the anger of someone whose comfortable worldview was beginning to crumble. "Stop what, Mom?" I asked with icy calm. "Stop the truth? Stop defending yourself? Or stop embarrassing you in front of everyone because you're finally hearing what I've been saying to myself in private for years?" And then Cousin Mark, who had been huddled against the back of his chair this whole time, as if trying to hide in the shadows, spoke up. "Wait, so you actually bought a house? Like, a real one, not a rented apartment?" I turned to him and nodded, smiling. "Yeah, 3 bedrooms, an outdoor terrace, a garden with lavender already in bloom. I've been living there for a few months now. It's amazing," he said sincerely. "Congratulations." "Thank you, Mark," I replied, and although my voice didn't waver, I felt something shift inside, like a weight had been weighing me down a little. It's nice that at least one of my family congratulated me. That struck a chord. I could see it in their faces, which suddenly seemed to wake up. They realized that for years they had been told a completely different story about me, the story of a loser, lost on the outskirts of life, and now they suddenly saw before them a woman who all this time simply lived her life, not flaunting, not begging for recognition. "I think we should all calm down," my father said, but his voice no longer sounded like his usual paternal calm, but like the weariness of a man who had lost a battle that he did not even realize was real. "No, Dad," I said firmly, "I think we should all be honest at least once. I think everyone here should know exactly what kind of family we really are, what you pretend to be, and what you are when you take off the mask." Mom stood up abruptly, the chair beneath her sliding across the floor with an unpleasant creak, as if the furniture in the house could no longer withstand the strain. "Carlotta, you need to leave, right now," she said, not looking at me. I looked around the table. Their faces, shocked and full of realization, stared at me, and for the first time, there was no contempt in their eyes. These people had spent years thinking of me as a failure, a daughter who couldn't get her life together, who was always stumbling, always behind, and now they saw that I was alive, I was real, I was stronger than they thought. "You know what, Mom?" I said, standing up, smoothing my dress, not out of shame, not out of shyness, but because I wanted to do everything neatly, elegantly, with dignity. "You're right, I really do have to go." I walked to the door slowly, unhurriedly, without glancing back, because I no longer needed to seek approval. I was leaving because I was tired of pretending that this family dysfunction was normal, that your constant reproaches are care, that your silence is love. Silence, thick as smoke, accompanied me all the way to the front door. I put on my coat, buttoned up, and only then did I hear insistent whispers from behind, my mother trying to say something to my father, someone saying my name out loud, someone daring to call my behavior a scene, but I did not look back. That evening I returned home late, but I felt lighter than ever in recent years. The confrontation was cruel, but so necessary. I could no longer carry someone else's guilt, someone else's disappointment, someone else's picture of my imperfection. For the first time in my life, I did not swallow the offense, I did not turn away. I said what had been building up inside me for decades, and it was like a breath, deep, liberating, cleansing. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, my phone began to ring. My mother's name was flashing on the screen in the cold light. I didn't pick up, I just let it go to voicemail, then my father, then Beatrice. I ignored them all, because I knew that if they really wanted to apologize, they would start with an admission. In the morning, I woke up to the faint singing of birds outside my window, went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat on the terrace, where it was still cool. The sun was just beginning to rise over the garden, and I read the messages, dry, angry, accusatory. Mom, you embarrassed us in front of everyone, how could you? Dad, your behavior yesterday was unacceptable, call us back. Beatrice, you ruined my ad, everyone was talking about you and not about my engagement. I deleted them all without answering a single one, because if they wanted to talk honestly, if they really regretted the way they treated me all these years, they would have started with this. They would say, I'm sorry, not, how could you? The messages kept coming all week, and every one of them, whether a quick rebuke or a long paragraph of forced drama and wounded dignity, sounded like an attempt to shift the blame for everything that had happened onto me, to make me responsible for their sudden fall from the pedestal from which they had come to view the world. They wrote about reputation, about how I had embarrassed them in front of the family, how Aunt Carol, they said, interrogated them the next day, demanding to know why Mom had lied about me being a loser, and how, in their eyes, our family was no longer considered a model. Mom complained that the whole family had suddenly become inconvenient, that they were being bombarded with calls, asked uncomfortable questions about my life, about my birthdays, about how it was that I had bought a house without them even knowing. One of the messages, almost desperately, said, "You need to fix this." I stared at the screen and asked myself, what? Fix the truth? Fix the fact that I hadn't finally spoken up? Fix the fact that I hadn't apologized for achieving something they thought I was never meant to? A week later, on a warm spring day, I was working in the garden, carefully pruning roses and loosening the soil under the lavender, trying to capture in this process the piece I was missing so much, when I suddenly heard car doors slam in the driveway. I looked up, brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, and my heart skipped a beat as I saw my parents and Beatrice heading toward my house. Someone had obviously given them my address. I wiped my hands on the faded knees of my jeans and stepped out onto the porch to meet them, not smiling, not trying to be a welcoming hostess. They stood awkwardly shifting from one foot to the other, looking at the front of the house, the wooden steps, the neatly trimmed bushes and flower beds, and I could feel their eyes trying to find a flaw in my house, a weak spot, something to cling to. It's a nice place, Beatrice said, and there was more than just a statement in her voice than envy, barely hidden, like a blade under a thin veil. It's bigger than mine. What do you want? I asked evenly, not inviting them in, making it clear that I didn't have to be polite. Not today, we need to talk, Mom said, and her voice was surprisingly soft. Can we come in? I stepped aside silently to let them in, and we moved into the living room, where there was order and silence, not a forced silence, but a real silence, the kind that could only come from a home where everything was in its place. They looked around with wary respect, as if they were in a strange world. The wooden floors, the high cornices, the soft light from the window, the furniture I had spent weeks choosing so that it would reflect me. Not the Carlotta they had imagined, but the real me. Carlotta, my mother began, her expression taking on the look of a worried parent, though the worry was not about me. We have a problem. Since last weekend, everyone has been calling us, Aunt Carol, Jim, Lisa, even Mark. Everyone is asking questions. Why didn't we know about your house? Why weren't we at your birthday parties? She paused, but my father quickly took over, unable to contain himself any longer. They think we're terrible parents. They think we don't love you. He spoke with indignation, as if the accusation were unexpected and unfair. I looked at them and asked the only, but perhaps the simplest, question, and you? The question hung in the air like the sound of a gunshot. No one answered right away. Only after a moment did my mother say, "Of course we do," but her voice sounded strained, as if she were reading a line from a bad script. "You're our daughter. That's a funny way to say it, I said quietly, and at that moment Beatrice stepped forward, deciding to take the initiative into her own hands. Listen, she began, as if she were going to a business meeting, we have to do something about this. I'm having a housewarming next month, then the engagement, then the wedding, and now half the family says they don't want to come because of all the drama, they refuse because they don't want to see conflict. So you have to have another party, eh? Housewarming, a public one, with family, we will help you, we will organize it, invite everyone, and then we will tell everyone that we made up, that you forgave us, everything will look good. I stared at her, not believing my ears. You want me to lie? I asked, and there was no screaming or hysteria in my voice, only fatigue. We want you to help us save face, my father answered calmly, we will arrange everything, we just need to show that we are a normal family. And then I couldn't help but laugh, quietly at first, then louder, until I had to lean against the edge of the fireplace. The laughter came out of me like a protest, like a release, because I finally understood the absurdity of the situation. They hadn't come for forgiveness, or an explanation, or to ask how I was doing, they had come to ask me to be part of their lie. No, I won't lie for you, I won't pretend that we have a good relationship, I won't help you convince everyone that you are wonderful parents. Beatrice's face turned as red as a schoolgirl caught stealing. Fine, she snapped, then we won't invite you to my wedding. Okay, I said without a pause, I wouldn't have come anyway. They all stared at me as if I had just struck a blow, as if what I had said was a betrayal. You can't be serious, Mom whispered, shaking. I'm very serious, I replied, I'm tired of pretending, tired of making up excuses for how you treat me, tired of being your disappointment, when in fact I've achieved so much more than you could ever imagine, and most importantly, I did it myself, without you, and you have no right now to ask me to help you preserve the image that you've spent years trying to force on others. That's ridiculous, Dad muttered, you're our daughter, you can't just walk away like that. I went to the door, opened it, and held it. I think it's time for you to go. They left, not quietly. Beatrice was crying, Mom was muttering that it wasn't over yet, Dad was whispering something angrily about ungrateful children. I closed the door behind them, leaned my back against it, and, closing my eyes, felt a wave of relief pass through my body, not fear, not pain, but release. I was exhausted, but free. 2 weeks later, Sarah called me, as usual, without warning, with news, as if she could no longer hold it in, and, breathing heavily with excitement, blurted out into the phone, almost without pausing between words, what she had heard from our cousin Lisa. Beatrice's housewarming, the one that should have been her triumph, her loud return to family love and universal admiration, had turned out to be a complete failure. I, of course, did not expect to hear the details, but Sarah's voice sounded with the intonation of incredible but pleasant gossip, and I could not help but say in surprise, "Really?" To which she replied with a short, satisfied yes, as if it were not just the truth but a small restoration of justice. According to her, almost no one from the family showed up. Aunt Carol and her daughter didn't come, Uncle Jim and his wife said they had a cold, Mark and Lisa canceled at the last minute, and even the distant relatives who usually never miss a single gathering found an excuse to stay home. It seemed that most of them had indeed decided to organize an unspoken boycott, and, oddly enough, they were now all, as Sarah put it, on Team Carlotta. I felt a little ashamed. After all, I hadn't intended to take revenge or undermine my family's reputation, I had simply told the truth, but even this truth, spoken out loud, was devastating for them. But if I felt ashamed, it was only a little, somewhere on the level of a slight pang of conscience, because deep down I knew that everything that had happened was only a consequence of their own actions. They had spent years building this fragile construction of a perfect family, in which I had always remained behind the scenes, and now that the truth had shattered the facade, they were faced with the consequences. Over the next few months, something happened that I initially perceived as a miracle, but then realized it was just life, the way it was supposed to be from the very beginning. Relatives began to call me personally, without the mediation of parents, without filters, without bias. Aunt Carol invited me to her daughter's graduation and even specifically added, I want you to feel like you are part of the family, too. Uncle Jim invited me to a barbecue at his country house and asked, almost as a compliment, to bring my apple pie, the same one he had heard about from Mark, and Mark himself, one evening, wrote to me that he wanted to look at my house. ask for advice on decorating his apartment, and generally spend time with you, because I think you are cool, and I did not know that before. I started showing up at family events, without fear, without anxiety, without the need to fit in or be on guard, and, amazingly, for the first time in years, I actually enjoyed these gatherings, without my parents, without Beatrice, without their shadow. Their looks, their constant comparisons, I felt like I could just be myself, with my own words, my own tastes, my own thoughts. Relatives, one after another, apologized for believing my parents' words without checking for themselves. "We always wondered why you never showed up," Aunt Carol would say, "but Gemma always told us you were ashamed, that you didn't want to. We should have reached out to you directly. We should have known something was wrong." And so, almost imperceptibly, through months of conversations, visits, and dinners, I became closer to my extended family than I had ever been in my entire life. I host dinners at my home now, setting the table for 12, choosing the wine and salads, decorating the terrace with lanterns, and these evenings have become something constant, warm, real. I am now in a family group chat where Lisa sends photos of her cats, Carol shares recipes, and Jim jokes about the weather, and no one forgets my birthday. Finally, people write to me not out of pity, not out of duty, but from the heart. They treat me as an equal, as a valuable, full-fledged member of the family, not as a mistake in their perfectly constructed equation. Parents and Beatrice? Radio silence. I have heard nothing from them, except that I accidentally learned from Lisa that Beatrice got married last month. The wedding was modest, almost private, and, according to rumors, many found excuses not to attend. I did not feel gloating, not even particularly curious. I simply recorded the fact. I did not miss them, and what's amazing is that I thought I would. I thought that something in me would yearn for them, that some part of me would be waiting for a call or a gesture of reconciliation. But no, my life is calm, honest, full of people who really want to know how I'm doing, who rejoice in my victories and don't belittle them, don't devalue them. Sometimes, when I walk through the rooms of my house, the very ones that I decorated myself, choosing the color of the walls, the texture of the sofa, the angles of the light, or when I go out into the garden where every plant was planted with my own hands, I feel proud not only of what I've built, not only of what I've achieved, but above all, of the fact that one day I found the strength to say enough and stand up for myself. Leave a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.